The summer wind moved softly across the rooftop of the Asterium Tower, carrying with it the glittering hum of Chicago at night. From 40 floors up, the city looked less like steel and concrete and more like a constellation scattered across the earth, alive, luminous, endlessly becoming. Standing within the glass pavilion that crowned the rooftop, Amina Cole allowed herself a quiet breath. She rarely enjoyed the spotlight, but tonight, surrounded by investors, officials, and visionaries of the city she loved, she felt a rare flicker of pride. This was the celebration of the Lakeshore Renewal Initiative, the largest urban revitalization project Chicago had undertaken in a generation. Her project, her vision, born from years of sleepless nights, community listening sessions, and meticulously crafted models. Yet the applause was not for her. It rolled instead toward the man in the tailored navy suit at the center of the crowd. Luca Moretti, the CEO whose charm alone could convince a room that gravity bowed to him. His voice carried like warm velvet over crystal, smooth, confident, practiced. The kind of voice that made people want to believe in him. And none of this, Luca declared with a perfectly timed smile, would be possible without the tireless work of our extraordinary team. Team, that single word, so small yet so merciless, skimmed across Amina's heart like a blade. She lifted her champagne glass, masking the tightness in her throat. She wasn't naive. She had long understood that public credit flowed upward in firms like Moretti Urban Group. But tonight, as Luca accepted praise for design breakthroughs she alone had created, the imbalance felt sharper, uglier. He glanced toward her then, offering a smile reserved only for her. A smile that made promises without ever speaking them. For 2 years, he had hovered somewhere between mentor, confidant, and temptation. She had always stayed just far enough away to protect herself, yet close enough to believe he valued her brilliance. Tonight, even that illusion began to crack. Her phone buzzed lightly in her hand. Amina stepped toward the glass perimeter, where the city opened beneath her, like a breathing ocean of lights. She tilted the screen just enough to read the message. Unknown number. I have proof. He stole every major project. Yours is next. The world did not stop, but it shifted. Amina felt it deep inside, an abrupt, disorienting tilt, as if the ground beneath the rooftop had dropped a fraction of an inch. Her breath thinned. The music played on. The laughter swelled. Luca's toast rose proudly in the air, but none of it reached her. All she saw was the message's cold certainty. She swallowed, tasting champagne turned sour. Stolen. Every major project. Yours is next. Behind her, Luca was beginning to move through the crowd, drifting toward her with the ease of someone who always expected to be welcomed. His reflection appeared faintly on the glass beside her shoulder. Tall, handsome, confident, a man accustomed to being adored. Amina, he said softly when he reached her. His tone dipped in concern. You slipped away. Everything all right? She turned to him with a practiced smile, the kind she used when community meetings turned tense or reporters pushed too hard. A smile that hid everything. Of course, she replied, lifting her glass. Just taking in the view. Luca stepped closer, too close for colleagues, perfectly normal for the blurred lines they had come to inhabit. The scent of his cologne, warm cedar softened by citrus, brushed her senses. His hand grazed her lower back. A view like you deserves a better vantage point, he murmured. The words, once flattering, now rang hollow. Because for the first time, Amina felt the power imbalance in their every interaction. The subtle manipulation in his praise, the careful ways he had made her feel chosen while ensuring she stayed in his shadow. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. If you want to protect your work, meet me. Midnight, 14th in Aberdeen. Come alone. Amina's heartbeat quickened. The location was in the West Loop. Quiet at night, industrial, untidy with half-renovated warehouses. Not the sort of place one visited lightly. Amina? Luca's voice dipped. You seem distracted. She hid her phone behind her clutch. Just tired. It's been a long week. He leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with a familiarity that made her skin tighten. "You've earned rest," he said warmly, "but stay a little longer. Tonight is important." Important for him. A celebration for him. Credit for work that wasn't his. Amina smiled politely, but inside something decisive clicked into place. She wasn't sure what waited at that midnight meeting, or who, but she knew one thing with burning clarity. She was done letting someone else shape the narrative of her genius. And as she stepped back into the soft glow of the pavilion lights, she felt a quiet shift. Not in the world this time, but in herself. Something steady, sharp, and unwilling to be dimmed. If you're enjoying this unfolding journey, Amina's world, her heart, her fight, remember you can like, comment, and follow to stay connected. Every click helps keep stories like this alive and thriving, and I'd love to bring you deeper into the next chapter. Long before the rooftop glow of the Asterium Tower, before the midnight text that cracked the world open, Amina Cole had built her life like she built her cities, with intention, resilience, and an eye for quiet beauty where others saw nothing at all. She had grown up on the south side of Chicago, in a fenced-in apartment overlooking train tracks that rattled at dawn like restless giants. Most people found the noise irritating. Amina found it rhythmic, almost comforting. The trains were proof that movement was always possible, that life could begin in one place and still find its way to another. Her mother worked double nursing shifts. Her father repaired HVAC systems for neighbors, who often paid him in gratitude rather than cash. And Amina learned early how to dream with discipline. Her notebooks were filled not with doodles, but with meticulously drawn street grids, imagined parks, widened sidewalks, and rooftop gardens she hoped could soften the heat of concrete summers. Those childhood sketches would one day become the polished brilliance Luca Moretti praised in private and paraded as his own in public. But before the bitterness, there had been wonder. Amina earned scholarships, internships, and the kind of respect that made professors whisper she was destined for something extraordinary. She graduated top of her class from MIT with a focus in urban informatics. Her ability to blend community insight with advanced modeling, earning her a reputation as a quiet but undeniable force. When Moretti Urban Group recruited her, Luca himself made the call. "It has to be you," he'd said, his voice rich and persuasive. "You see the city the way I wish I could." In those days, she believed him. She believed in the vision of a company that claimed to value sustainability, equity, and innovation. She believed Luca when he said she wasn't just an employee, she was the future. For the first year, he treated her as such. He included her in investor meetings, sought her opinion in private strategy sessions, and boasted of her brilliance to industry insiders. The firm's upper floor buzzed with rumors that Amina would soon be promoted to Director of Urban Systems, the first Black woman, the youngest, the most technically advanced candidate the firm would ever have. But there was always a condition, soft-spoken and smiling. "Just stick close to me. You and I build things together." At first, the proximity thrilled her. Luca had the kind of charm that made people feel seen, the kind of presence that could light up a boardroom or soften a tense community council. When he walked into a space, even the air seemed to shift. Amina tried to draw boundaries, firm ones, professional ones, but they blurred faster than she could reinforce them. A compliment slipped too warm, a late-night brainstorming session that lingered too long, a moment of silence charged with unspoken possibility. He never pushed, but he always hovered, always near enough to be felt, never far enough to ignore. And for a time, she told herself it was normal, that this was how mentorship worked at high levels, how talented women were elevated, how doors opened through proximity, trust, mutual recognition. But real recognition never came. Not publicly, not when it mattered. Whenever a major milestone was reached, Luca made sure the spotlight landed on him. Not through theft in the obvious sense, but through a subtle redirection, a reframing of her innovations as team accomplishments, then as Moretti Urban's strategic breakthroughs. Her models became his vision, her algorithms, his solution, her community engagement, his initiative. At first, she thought it was accidental, an oversight. Then it became a pattern, then a system. Still, she stayed, not out of fear, but because she believed in the work, in the communities relying on it, in the chance to reshape the city she loved. Yet the higher she rose, the more invisible the ceiling above her became. Transparent, glimmering, deceptive. She could see the title she deserved, the recognition she had earned. But every time she reached for it, the ceiling lowered just enough to keep her in place. Luca soothed her doubts with his velvet reassurance. You're indispensable, Amina. No one else sees what you see. Trust me, your time is coming. But trust is fragile, and once cracked, it never fits the same way again. The first fracture appeared when she discovered that the strategic plan for the Lakeshore Renewal Initiative, the plan she had crafted, was being shown to investors as Luca's personal brainchild. The second fracture came when she overheard a senior consultant refer to her as Moretti's golden engine. Not a partner, not a leader, just a quietly running machine powering someone else's ascent. And then came tonight, the rooftop celebration, where Luca stood on the center stage absorbing applause meant for her, while she stood in the periphery like an assistant watching her own brilliance from behind glass. That was when she knew. She had been chosen, yes, but not to be elevated, to be used. She thought of her parents, of the train tracks humming beneath her childhood window, of the belief she carried all her life that movement was always possible. She had climbed into this world with bare hands and sleepless nights. She had risen on merit alone, on brilliance unpolished by privilege. She would not let the person who praised her in private steal her future in public. The glass ceiling above her wasn't invisible anymore. It was glowing, cracking, threatening to collapse. And Amina Cole, calm, brilliant, underestimated, was finally ready to break through it. What she didn't know yet was that in the shadows of the city, another force was already moving toward her, one that would change her perception of power, loyalty, and love in ways she never imagined. The rooftop celebration had thinned to a gentle afterglow. Clusters of guests drifting toward elevators, lingering farewells echoing through the glass pavilion, the last threads of music dissolving into the Chicago night. The moment Luca became absorbed in a conversation with state officials, Amina slipped away, her pulse still unsettled by the messages waiting in her phone like small, coiled warnings. She needed air. She needed distance. She needed a moment untouched by Luca's presence and the swirling chaos of praise that wasn't hers. The elevator hummed softly as it descended to the executive floors. When the doors opened, the hallway greeted her with the sterile scent of high-end carpet and sleek lighting, a sharp contrast to the warm rooftop haze. Most of the office had already emptied for the night, leaving the corridors in a hush that felt almost reverent. Amina walked toward her workspace to gather her laptop, hoping to leave unnoticed. But habit guided her steps near Luca's corner office. Its door cracked just enough to let a sliver of light slip across the hall. She wouldn't have stopped. She never eavesdropped. But the sound of Luca's laughter, a low, triumphant ripple she had never heard directed at her, rooted her in place. She didn't breathe. She just listened. Of course the board loves the proposal, Luca said, the smile audible in every word. Cole's algorithmic mapping sealed it. She's the best technical mind I've got, and she doesn't even realize how much I shape her ideas. Amina felt her stomach constrict. He continued, unhurried, comfortable, too comfortable. No, not worried, he said to whoever was on the other end of the call. She's brilliant but naive. Still thinks this is a partnership, and by the time construction starts, she'll be phased out. Clean exit, no disruption. HR already knows the timeline. Her hand tightened around her clutch. Phased out, clean exit, no disruption. They were talking about her career as if it were a faulty component in an assembly line. Something disposable, once it had served its purpose. But what came next chilled her deeper than betrayal. "I've already leveraged her projections to secure the next round of financing," Luca said, voice soft with pride. "Investors think our revenue timeline is ironclad. They don't know Cole used idealized assumptions. But it doesn't matter, their money is in. Once we acquire the rest of the lakeshore parcels, the narrative locks in." A pause, a chuckle. Then, "Yes, the numbers aren't real, but if the city signs off before anyone questions them, the profit potential dwarfs the risk." Amina felt the world tilt. This wasn't just about stolen credit. This was financial misrepresentation, misleading investors, abusing public trust. Her models weren't wrong, they were never wrong, but they had been early-stage simulations, not final feasibility assessments. He had taken her data and sold it as certainty, using it to inflate forecasts and lure investment long before due diligence was complete. Her breath snagged. Luca wasn't just unethical, he was dangerous. The scrape of a chair pulled her back to herself. Luca stood abruptly, pacing now, his voice lowered but not enough to mask the brash certainty of a man convinced he would never face consequences. "Relax," he muttered into the phone. "If regulators investigate, I'll pin the projections on Cole. She won't fight. She's too loyal, too careful. And if she does make noise, we've got the NDAs." Amina stumbled back, her shoulder brushing the wall. The slight noise was enough. Luca paused mid-sentence. She froze. "A minute," he said quickly into the phone before setting it down. The shadow of his figure shifted toward the door. Amina's body reacted before her mind caught up. She stepped silently down the hall, turning the corner just as his office door opened fully. She walked with measured breath toward her workspace, refusing to let her trembling legs give her away. Behind her, Luca's presence hovered, searching. "Amina?" he called gently. "Still here?" His voice, so smooth, so warm, felt like poison now. She composed herself before turning, offering him a neutral smile. "Yes, just grabbing my laptop before heading out." Luca's eyes softened, and he closed the distance between them with the familiarity of someone who believed he belonged in her space. "You vanished upstairs," he murmured, his tone threaded with concern. "Everything okay?" "Everything is collapsing," she wanted to say. "You've stolen from me. You've used me. You're risking everything I've built." But she said none of it. Instead, she gave a mild, steady nod. "Just tired." "Tired?" His hand brushed her elbow lightly, a gesture he'd used countless times. "You carried the presentation tonight. I relied on you more than I should have." It was a perfect performance. Gentle admission, humble charm. The kind of moment that once would have softened her edges. Tonight, it tightened them. "Go home," he urged softly. "Rest. We've got a big week ahead." She nodded, excused herself, and walked to her office without letting her back stiffen with the truth he didn't know she held. Only when the door closed behind her did she let out a shuddering breath. Her mind raced. Betrayal was one thing, but to be framed for financial misconduct, to be used as a buffer between Luca and the regulators who would eventually come knocking. She pressed a hand to her chest as panic and clarity surged through her simultaneously. She needed the truth, all of it, not just for herself, but for the city, her city, that Luca was gambling with. And she needed allies, not the kind who smiled and lied, not the kind who praised her only to steal her work. Real allies. She didn't know yet whose number had texted her earlier, or what midnight meeting awaited her at 14th in Aberdeen. But she knew this. Tonight had ripped the last illusions from her eyes. And for the first time since joining Moretti Urban Group, she understood exactly what she was up against. A man who thought he owned her brilliance. And a crime far bigger than stolen credit. When she stepped into the elevator, her phone vibrated again. One soft buzz, like a heartbeat reminding her she was not alone in this shadowed turning point. Midnight had a way of softening Chicago's sharp edges. By the time Amina turned onto 14th in Aberdeen, the city felt as if it were holding its breath. Warehouses and converted lofts standing in quiet rows, streetlights casting long, golden pools on cracked pavement. The daytime clamor had drained away, leaving only the distant hum of traffic and the occasional gust of wind whispering against old brick. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, every sense alert. This was the kind of corner where stories could begin or end badly, depending on who was waiting. A silver sedan idled near the curb, its headlights off. As Amina approached, the driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, smoothing the front of a simple navy blazer, as if to steady herself. She wasn't what Amina expected. No shadowy stranger, no theatrical figure from a thriller, just a black woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes, neatly braided hair pulled into a low bun, and a face that carried the kind of quiet that comes after too much knowing. "Amina," the woman called softly. "Yes." Amina stopped a few steps away, muscles coiled. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated, as if weighing the cost of the answer. "Naomi Briggs. Well, you could say I work for Luca too. Compliance and risk management. Internally, they like to call me the conscience they don't listen to." Her attempt at a smile didn't quite land. It curved, then fell, like a wave losing strength on the sand. "You're the one who texted me," Amina said. "I am." Naomi nodded. "And I'm sorry it had to be like this. But I didn't think you'd ignore a stranger who sounded dramatic at midnight." Amina glanced around. They were alone except for the car in the wide, indifferent sky. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Why now?" Naomi's gaze softened with something fragile and painful. "Because you're next," she said, "and I'm tired of watching it happen." She gestured to the passenger side. "Will you sit? We're exposed out here, and I promise I'm less terrifying under this terrible fluorescent dome light." After a heartbeat of hesitation, Amina slid into the car. It smelled faintly of coffee and worn leather, the kind of scent that clung to people who worked late more often than they wanted to admit. Naomi closed the door, shut off the engine, and for a moment they sat in silence, the city pressing gently against the windows. "I've seen your work," Naomi began, turning toward her. "Not the slides Luca shows investors, the real files, the raw models, the memos you send that people skim and pretend they read. You see the city in layers most of us miss." Compliments usually warmed Amina. This one hurt. "And I've seen what he does with your work," Naomi added, her voice softening further. "I've watched him cherry-pick your projections, inflate them, strip your name, and stitch them into his own narrative. It's not new." Amina's hands stayed folded in her lap, but she felt the tightening in her shoulders, the instinct to brace. "How many?" she asked. "Before me." Naomi's eyes flickered down to the folder on the console between them. "3 that I can prove," she replied. "2 I strongly suspect. And that's just in the last 6 years." The weight of that number sank slowly, like a stone dropped into deep water. Naomi opened the folder. Inside were copies, emails, performance reviews, discrete settlement agreements, versions of project decks with different names on the cover slides. Names scratched out, replaced, forgotten. "This one," she said, tapping a document, "is a designer from Bogota. She built the framework for the Riverline District project. Luca promised her a directorship. 3 months after the city approved the plan, she was let go for cultural fit issues and communication style concerns. She signed a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for severance and a neutral reference. She hasn't worked in a major firm since." Her finger moved to another page. "This one, a systems architect from Lagos, brilliant with integrated transit modeling. His traffic flow solution is still being quoted in internal decks as Moretti standard methodology. HR file says his position was eliminated due to restructuring. Funny how his work stayed, only he disappeared." Amina looked at the pages, the names, the tidy signatures under suffocating paragraphs of legal indemnity. "And you?" she asked, her voice low. "Where do you fit in this?" Naomi's throat moved as she swallowed. "I'm the one who drafts the paperwork," she said quietly. "The NDAs, the severance templates, the board memos that turned theft into strategic realignment. At first, I told myself I was just doing my job, that I was protecting the company, and if I didn't do it, someone else would. But after the third, I stopped sleeping. Her laugh was brittle. You know what it does to a person, writing confidentiality clauses that bury someone's life's work? Amina didn't answer. She already knew, even if she'd never held the pen. Naomi gathered herself. I saw it starting with you months ago, she continued. The pattern is always the same. Private praise, public erasure, increasing control, then the narrative of performance risk. A few whispered doubts, a few strategically placed concerns. By the time the axe falls, everyone thinks it was inevitable. Amina thought of the consultant calling her Moretti's golden engine, thought of quiet glances at meetings she hadn't fully understood then. The sense that something was being arranged around her without her consent. You didn't warn them, Amina said, not accusing but stating a painful fact. The others. Naomi's eyes glistened, but she did not look away. No, she whispered. The first time, I believed him. The second time, I convinced myself I didn't have the whole story. By the third, I knew exactly what was happening, and I still kept my head down. Why now? Amina asked again, more softly this time. Naomi inhaled slowly, as if breathing in her own answer. Because you remind me of the person I was before all this, she said, before compromise became routine. You're brilliant and you're principled, and you still believe the system can be bent towards something fair. She let out a shaky breath. And because Luca is playing a more dangerous game now, this isn't just about stolen credit anymore. He's misrepresenting the financials, Amina murmured, remembering the call. Using my early-stage models as final forecasts, planning to pin it on me if it collapses. Naomi nodded once. Yes, if you do nothing, he will not just erase your name, he will use it as a shield. And when that happens, I'm not sure any of us can live with what we let him do. Silence settled between them, heavy but not empty. It was filled with all the things they both understood without saying. The risk, the danger, the inevitability that once they stepped forward, there would be no going back. What do you want from me? Amina asked at last. Naomi's answer was simple, and it shook Amina more than any threat. I want a chance to make this right, she said. I want to help you protect what's yours, and I want to stop watching brilliant people be broken and discarded like defective parts. She slid a USB drive from the folder and placed it gently in Amina's hand. It was small, almost insignificant, yet it felt heavier than any blueprint she'd ever carried. This is everything I've collected, Naomi said. Internal emails, drafts, proof that Luca has done this before and that he's doing it again. It's not enough on its own, but it's a start. You're not crazy. You're not imagining it. Amina stared at the drive resting against her palm. This path, Naomi added quietly, will cost you. Maybe your job, maybe your comfort, maybe your illusions about how this world works. It might cost me everything too. Their eyes met, two black women sitting in a parked car at midnight, holding between them not just evidence, but the possibility of tearing down a structure that had been built on their silence. But if we do nothing, Naomi whispered, it will cost you your name, your work, your future. And I can't be the one writing another NDA to bury someone like you. The city outside remained unchanged. Bricks, light, distant sirens. But inside the car, something shifted, quiet and irrevocable. Amina closed her fingers around the drive. Okay, she said, her voice steady, anchored. Then we won't let him write the ending this time. Naomi exhaled, like a woman who had been underwater too long. Good, she murmured. Because whether you realize it yet or not, Amina, this is the moment everything starts to move. The city was beginning to pale at the edges by the time Amina finally stepped into her apartment. Dawn had not yet arrived, but the sky over Chicago had softened from black to a bruised indigo, as if the night itself had been wounded by too many secrets. Her apartment was small, carefully chosen, and meticulously kept. a corner unit with wide windows that framed the skyline like living art. On the coffee table rested stacks of architectural journals, a few worn novels, and a ceramic dish her mother had sent from a street market in Bronzeville. The space carried the quiet warmth of her, the way certain rooms remember the hands that arranged them. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, shutting her eyes. In her right hand, the USB drive pressed into her palm like a second heartbeat. Naomi's words hovered, refusing to recede. If we do nothing, he will take your name with your work. Amina placed her bag on the console and moved to the kitchen, setting the drive gently on the counter as if it might shatter. She filled a glass with water, took a slow sip, and stared at the tiny rectangle of metal and plastic that now held the weight of more than one life. She thought of the designers Naomi had described, their names, their contributions, their forced exits. People who had sacrificed time, vision, and pieces of themselves to build something, only to watch someone else walk away with their dreams stitched into his suit. Was that what awaited her? On the dining table, her laptop sat where she had left it that morning, open beside a scatter of printed maps and color-coded notes. The centerpiece of it all was the Lakeshore Renewal Initiative, her project, her city, her heart laid out in data and lines and carefully considered spaces for people she would never meet but already cared for. She sat down, the chair creaking softly under the weight of her exhaustion, and woke the laptop. The familiar glow bathed her face as the screen came to life, with dashboards, models, and email notifications she ignored. Instead, she opened a blank document and titled it simply, Record for Myself. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She did not start with the numbers. She started with the truth. Luca Moretti did not conceive the Lakeshore Renewal Initiative. I did. The sentence looked stark and strange on the page, like a confession and a declaration at once. She wrote the story of the project as she had lived it, the community roundtables, the nights replaying residents' voices in her head, the early sketches, the first models that married flood risk, demographic shifts, and transit equity into a design that finally made sense. As she wrote, memories surfaced. Emails sent at 1:47 a.m., messages from Luca praising her genius, draft decks where her name had once been prominent before it began shrinking, sliding toward the team section. The more she wrote, the more she saw the pattern Naomi had described. Not as someone else's tragedy, but as her own unfolding. She paused, feeling the pull of two worlds inside her. In one, she did nothing. She stayed, accepted the next raise, the next vague promise of a title, watched her work roll out under Luca's polished speeches, clapped her hands at openings where her name appeared in ever smaller fonts, and prayed that when the numbers broke, they would break gently enough not to crush her. In that world, she might keep her salary, her health insurance, the polite nods from people who believed she was fortunate to be so close to power. But in that world, she would lose something she knew she could not rebuild once broken. Her sense of who she was. In the other world, she chose the fight. She followed the path Naomi had opened, gathering evidence, documenting everything, risking Luca's wrath. She would be labeled difficult, ungrateful, dangerous. Doors might close quietly to her as industry players protected their own comfort. In that world, she might lose her job, her security, the carefully crafted trajectory she and her family had sacrificed so much to create. But she would keep her name, her integrity, her ability to look herself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Amina lifted the glass of water to her lips, then set it down again, untouched. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from her mother, sent hours earlier. Hey baby, haven't heard your voice this week. Call when you can. Love you. Guilt pricked at her, gentle but insistent. Her parents had worked themselves to the bone so she could stand in the rooms she now occupied. They believed in the story she had told them, that hard work, talent, and patience could carve a path through structures that weren't built with her in mind. To them, she was proof that the world could make room for a black girl from the South Side if she just kept climbing. What would it mean to tell them she was thinking of stepping off the ladder altogether. She opened her call log, thumb hovering over her mother's name, but stopped. She wasn't ready yet, not to worry them, not until she had something more than fear to offer. Instead, she turned back to the laptop and inserted the USB drive. The device blinked to life, a tiny blue pulse in the dim kitchen. Folders appeared on screen. /projects, /HR_memos, /legal_drafts, /internal_correspondence. She opened the first set. There they were, side-by-side versions of project decks, each iteration showing a slow erasure. Names dropped, credits consolidated, narratives rewritten. She saw her own pattern reflected in other stories, as if Luca had been rehearsing for her for years. She scrolled through email threads where Luca had called a designer brilliant one month and not a fit the next. Notes from HR performing linguistic gymnastics to turn unjust dismissals into neutral progressions. Legal drafts written in Naomi's steady, weary language, binding people's silence with monetary consolation. The files made her stomach churn. Yet beneath the nausea, something else began to form. A clear, focused anger. Not the kind that burned wildly and vanished, but the kind that could be shaped, directed, used. She opened a new document and began constructing a timeline. Her first day at Moretti Urban. The date the Lakeshore models were initiated. Each meeting where she presented her work. Each email where Luca acknowledged her authorship. Each shift in language when your model became our concept and then my vision. Line by line, she built a record that no one could dismiss as emotional or unfounded. It was pattern and proof, logic and memory woven together. At some point, the sky outside her window lightened into a pale gray, then slowly flushed with the faintest pink. Morning had arrived without asking her permission. Amina sat back, her eyes aching, her shoulders tense. She had not slept, but she had done something else. She had committed. The fear was still there, real, sharp, whispering of lost security and shattered plans. But it now shared space with a different feeling, a quiet, unwavering resolve that she did not recognize at first because she had buried it so long under professionalism and politeness. She reached for her phone again. This time, she didn't call her mother. She searched for a name she had not yet used, but would soon need. Renee Castor, the whistleblower attorney Naomi had mentioned at the end of their meeting, almost as a contingency, almost as a prayer. Her fingers hovered over the number Naomi had sent. Not yet, she thought. Soon, but not yet. First, she needed to face one more thing. Amina saved her documents, backed them up on an encrypted drive, and closed the laptop. She stood, stretched the stiffness from her limbs, and walked to the large window framing the city. From here, she could see where the reimagined Lakeshore would be, where her design would either honor the people who lived there or be used as a mask for profiteering and displacement. She pressed her fingertips lightly against the glass. "I won't let you use me to hurt them," she whispered. The words meant for Luca, for the firm, for the faceless machinery that had chewed through people before her. Choosing the fight did not make her immune to fear. It simply meant she loved something, her work, her city, herself, enough to carry that fear with her. And somewhere, in another part of Chicago, Naomi Briggs sat awake too, staring at her own ceiling, knowing that for the first time in years, she was no longer complicit. Two women, in two different rooms, had chosen to stop being silent parts of the machine. The risks were immense, the path ahead uncertain, but the decision had been made. And sometimes, Amina thought as the first golden line of sunrise edged over the lake, the only way to build something new was to admit, at last, that the old structure had to come down. The conference ballroom at the Marquette Hotel shimmered with the polished confidence of old money meeting new ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago River as it slid past in its steady, inscrutable way, a quiet witness to the deals forever being made above it. Round tables draped in white linen filled the room, each occupied by investors whose cufflinks gleamed as sharply as their expectations. At the front, a wide screen displayed the title slide Amina had designed herself. Lakeshore Renewal Initiative, Moretti Urban Group. Her name appeared in smaller font beneath Luca's. Of course, ready? Luca's voice drifted over her shoulder, smooth and warm, as if they were about to dance rather than face a room capable of reshaping the city. Amina kept her eyes on the laptop as she cued the first set of visuals. Always, she replied, her tone even. The last 48 hours had been a blur of quiet fury and disciplined preparation. She had met with Naomi again, refined her documentation, and rehearsed her presentation until the lines of her models were etched into the inside of her eyelids. Outwardly, nothing about her had changed. She was still the consummate professional, still the golden employee. Inwardly, she was something else now. A woman who had seen the machinery behind the curtain. A woman who had decided not to be crushed by it. As the room settled, Luca stepped to the podium, his expression a perfect blend of humility and authority. He didn't need notes. He spoke as if this vision had come to him in a dream, and the world had simply been waiting to hear it. "Good afternoon," he began, his smile effortless. "Thank you for joining us to witness the next chapter of Chicago's waterfront." His words flowed, painting broad strokes, sweeping promises. He spoke of opportunity, transformation, legacy. Amina stood at the side, her hands gently clasped, her face composed. Inside, she counted each time he used "I" where "we" would have been generous, and "we" where she would have been honest. "And now," Luca said at last, gesturing toward her, "I'd like you to hear from the brilliant mind who translated our vision into a living, breathing system. Our lead urban designer, Amina Cole." The applause was polite, curious. Amina stepped forward and felt, as she always did in these moments, the slight shift in the room, the way attention refocused, recalibrated. Some investors looked surprised, as if they'd expected someone older, someone whiter, someone less her. She met their eyes anyway. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, resonant without needing to be loud. "What you're about to see is not just a design, but a relationship, a negotiation between land, water, and the people who live with both." Her slides shifted into complex yet elegant visuals. Color-graded heat maps, mobility flows, layered diagrams that showed how flood risk, transit access, and public space could be woven into something humane and resilient. As she spoke, the room's skepticism softened into captivation. Numbers had never been enough for her. She told stories in them. "As you can see," she continued, pointing to a diagram where shaded walkways curved toward the lake, "we've prioritized pedestrian corridors that connect historically isolated neighborhoods to the waterfront. This isn't just about scenic views. It's about access, dignity, everyday beauty." A man at one of the front tables frowned thoughtfully, raising his hand. "What about commercial yield?" he asked. "All of this open space is admirable, but where's the revenue?" Amina smiled faintly. "In longevity," she replied, "we're not designing a weekend attraction. We're designing a district that can adapt, that draws steady, diverse use. Short-term yield is higher when you pave over everything. Long-term value is higher when people want to stay." There was a murmur of reluctant appreciation. She caught Luca's gaze from the periphery of the stage. His expression was pleased, but there was a flicker of something else there too. Wariness, possessiveness. She continued, walking them through stormwater retention strategies, microclimate considerations, social mobility corridors. By the time she finished, the room had quieted into that particular kind of silence that meant minds were working, recalibrating their expectations of what profitable could look like. When the last slide faded, there was a brief pause before the applause rose again, this time warmer, more engaged. As questions began, investors addressed most of them to Luca out of habit, then gradually turned to include her as they realized who held the deeper understanding of the project's intricacies. And in the back of the room, near the standing coffee station, one man watched her with a focus that felt different from all the others. He was tall, but not in a way that tried to occupy more space than necessary. Sandy brown hair, a touch unruly as if he had run his hand through it one too many times on the way here. A neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that seemed accustomed to both restraint and sudden, disarming laughter. His suit was impeccably cut, but subtly worn at the cuffs, as if he valued use over spectacle. He didn't take many notes. He didn't check his phone. He just watched. When the session closed and the room broke into clusters of small talk and business cards, Amina slipped toward the exit, eager to escape the swirl of Luca's orbit, if only for a moment. She almost made it. "Miss Cole?" The voice came from behind her. Low, clear, American with the faintest hint of somewhere West Coast in its relaxed cadence. She turned. The man from the back of the room approached, offering a hand. Up close, his eyes were a striking gray blue, not cold but observant, like a sky considering rain. "Amina," she said automatically, taking his hand. His grip was firm, but not overcompensating, the warmth of his palm a brief, grounding sensation. "And you are?" "Ethan Ward," he replied. "Northline Collective." The name landed between them with quiet weight. Even if she hadn't recognized him by face, the firm was unmistakable. Northline was Moretti Urban's most persistent rival in the sustainable development space. They were the disruptors, the ones developers either admired or dismissed as idealists pretending to do serious work. "I'm surprised to see you here," Amina said. A faint smile touched his lips. "Open investor sessions are open," he answered, "even to rivals. I like to know what stories are being told about the city I live in." There was something in the way he said it, no smugness, just a calm assertion of his right to witness. It intrigued her more than she wanted to admit. "I'll be honest," he added, tilting his head slightly. "I came expecting to hear another glossy pitch about waterfront luxury and thin greenwashing." "And what did you hear instead?" she asked. His gaze held hers without flinching. "I heard a designer who actually understands what the word public in public space is supposed to mean." The compliment lodged somewhere between her ribs. "Though," he continued, the edge of his mouth tightening, "I also heard a story being told in someone else's voice." She stilled. "What do you mean?" Amina asked, her tone careful. "Oh, Luca is very smooth," Ethan said lightly, glancing in the direction of the CEO, who was laughing with a cluster of investors. "But some of the language on those slides, that wasn't his. Complexity like that doesn't come from someone who keeps changing the subject when details get too specific." He looked back at her, eyes sharpening. "You're the architect of that framework, aren't you?" She could have deflected, should have, perhaps, but she found herself instead answering with quiet honesty. "Yes," she said, "I am." Ethan's expression softened into something almost like respect, tinged with anger, that wasn't directed at her. "I thought so," he murmured. "I've seen this pattern before." In another life, on another day, Amina might have smiled, accepted the praise, and walked away. Kept herself safe, kept things simple. But nothing was simple anymore. And the way he said "before" carried a history she couldn't help but want to know. The cafe Ethan chose was the opposite of the glittering hotel ballroom. Small, warm, and humming with a kind of quiet life that felt almost defiant. Horizon Grounds sat on a corner in Pilsen, its brick facade painted with a mural of hands, cradling a city made of leaves and light. Inside, strings of soft bulbs hung from the ceiling, casting a gentle glow over mismatched tables and scuffed wooden chairs. Amina had passed it a dozen times on site visits, always meaning to stop in, never quite finding the moment. Tonight, the moment found her. She pushed open the door, the bell chiming softly overhead. The scent of freshly ground coffee and baked cinnamon washed over her, comforting in a way she hadn't realized she needed until just then. Ethan was already there, seated near the window with a ceramic mug cupped between his hands. The evening light caught the edges of his profile, drawing a soft line from his temple to his jaw. He looked different here than in the ballroom, less polished, more real. His tie was gone, his collar open, The sleeves of his shirt rolled up just enough to reveal forearms, lightly dusted with color and faint scars. He stood when he saw her. "Amina," he greeted, voice quiet but clear. "Thanks for coming." She shrugged out of her coat, hanging it on the back of the empty chair opposite him before sitting. "You picked a good spot," she said. "Feels like the kind of place that remembers people." A flicker of a smile crossed his face, quick and genuine. "That's why Northline helped finance their renovation," he replied. "Good things survive when you help them." There it was again, that subtle difference. So many developers spoke only of what they could build. Ethan spoke of what he could help endure. A barista approached with easy familiarity. "The usual?" she asked him, then glanced at Amina. "And for you?" "Just a latte," Amina said. "Oat milk, if you have it." "We do," the barista replied. "Coming right up." When they were alone again, Ethan set his mug down, his eyes studying her with a quiet attentiveness that was neither invasive nor indifferent. "You looked composed today," he said, "more than most people would be, considering what's happening around you." Amina arched a brow. "And what exactly do you think is happening around me, Mr. Ward?" "Ethan," he corrected gently. "And I think Luca is tightening the noose while smiling for the cameras. That's his specialty." Her pulse flickered. "You sound very sure." "That's because I've seen it before," he replied. "Not just from him, but from people like him. Luca is just more polished about it." She leaned back, folding her arms lightly. "You said that at the hotel," she reminded him, "that you'd seen the pattern before. With him." Ethan nodded slowly. "Right after grad school," he began, "I was young, idealistic, and painfully willing to believe that charisma equaled integrity. My first real job was at a mid-sized development firm here in Chicago. Luca wasn't who he is now. He was an ambitious project lead with a talent for reading rooms and a hunger that made people forgive anything he did as long as he got results." He paused, gazed distant for a moment, as if replaying an old sequence. "I had this early concept," he continued, "for a linear eco-district along the river. Nothing as refined as your lakeshore work, but solid, flood-adaptive structures, tiered public walkways, integrated transit. I brought it to him because he seemed like someone who could help me sell it to the partners." Amina already knew the next part, or thought she did. Still, she let him say it. "He loved it," Ethan said, softly. "Or at least, that's what he told me. We spent nights refining it, talking about how it could redefine the city's relationship with the river. I was naive enough to think we were building something together." He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, only without any humor. 2 months later, the firm presented a major proposal to a consortium of investors. Riverfront transformation, sustainability, adaptive reuse, all my language, all our late-night sketches just cleaned up, sharpened, and stamped with his name. I wasn't in the room. He said later that the optics weren't right for a junior associate to lead. Amina felt a quiet ache unfurl in her chest. Different circumstances, same story. "What did you do?" she asked. "At first," Ethan admitted, "nothing. I swallowed it, told myself I'd get my chance next time, that this was how mentorship worked. Sound familiar?" The question hung between them, not accusing, simply true. "Eventually," he said, "I realized there wouldn't be a next time. Every idea I brought him went through the same cycle: excitement, collaboration, erasure. So I left. Started Northline from a one-room office above a laundromat with a loan, a laptop, and a stubborn refusal to let that be the story of my work." He took a sip from his mug, then set it aside, his gaze returning fully to her. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me," he said. "I'm telling you because I recognize the way he looks at you, the way he uses your language, the way he stands just a little too close to your work and calls it his own." Amina held his gaze. "You don't know everything that's happening," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "but I know enough to be angry on your behalf." The latte arrived, warm and fragrant, the foam crowned with a small, clumsy heart. Amina wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for something to hold on to. "And what do you want from me, exactly?" she asked after a beat. "Because you didn't invite me here just to reminisce about your origin story." Ethan smiled faintly. "No," he admitted, "I didn't." He folded his hands on the table, his tone shifting into something steadier, more deliberate. "I'm going to be direct," he said. "Northline has been watching the Lakeshore project closely. We've been trying to push a different vision for that stretch of the city for years. Slower, more community-centered, less dependent on flashy renderings and unrealistic numbers. Investors listen, but they gravitate toward Luca's promises. He's very good at making the improbable sound inevitable." Amina's jaw tightened. "You think his projections are unrealistic?" "I think," Ethan said carefully, "that the only way they work is if someone manipulates assumptions and hopes no one looks too closely." Her heart gave a weary thud. He didn't know how close he was to the truth. "What does that have to do with me?" she asked. Ethan's eyes softened, but his words remained steady. "I want you to bring your work to us," he said. "Not as a stolen file or some shady transfer, but as the person who actually conceived it. Northline will give you what Moretti never will. Your name on the project, full creative control, and legal protection for your authorship. We have the relationships to make the city listen, and the ethics to not burn down the communities we claim to serve." He paused, letting that sink in. "In return," he continued, "we ask for transparency about what he's done, about how he's used your work. We're not just talking about design anymore, Amina. We're talking about accountability." The word lingered between them, heavy, promising, dangerous. She studied him, searching his face for cracks, vanity, ulterior motives, arrogance. She saw something else instead. Determination, yes. Anger, certainly. But also a kind of careful respect that made her uneasy, precisely because she wanted to trust it. "And why," she asked softly, "should I believe you won't do exactly what he did? Just with better coffee and nicer murals." Ethan exhaled, accepting the question as deserved. "You shouldn't," he said. "Not yet. Trust isn't something I can demand from you with a good story and a clean contract. All I can do is put everything on the table and invite you to look closely." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder, sliding it across the table. "In there is a draft agreement," he explained, "written with language I insisted on after what happened to me. Authorship clauses, royalty provisions, creative control guarantees. I won't ask you to sign anything tonight, or ever, if it doesn't feel right. But I wanted you to see that I'm willing to bind myself to something more than just a handshake and a promise." She didn't touch the folder. "Even if your intentions are good," she said quietly, "this move makes me a target. Luca will come for me, hard. He already thinks he owns my future." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He doesn't," he said. "Not if you decide he doesn't." "That's easy for you to say," Amina replied, the words slipping out before she could temper them. "You're a white man with a successful firm. If this gets ugly, you'll still have a dozen rooms to walk into. I won't." The honesty stunned even herself. But she didn't take it back. Ethan flinched, not in offense, but in understanding. He nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I can't pretend the risks are the same for both of us. They aren't. And I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." Silence settled, thick but not hostile. "I'm not asking you to trust me today," he added quietly. "I'm asking you to remember you have options, that he is not the only door, no matter how much he's tried to convince you otherwise." Amina looked at the folder, then at the man offering it. Somewhere in her chest, something stretched between fear and possibility. She reached out, not to accept the agreement, but to rest her fingertips on its edge. "I'll read it," she said. "That's all I can promise right now." "That's more than enough," Ethan replied. He slid a business card on top of the folder. Simple, clean, embossed with Northline Collective and his name beneath it. No glossy logo, no tagline, just a number. She took the card and slipped it into her bag. On the walk home, the night felt different. Not safer, not yet, but wider. As if new streets had been drawn on a map she'd once thought she knew by heart. Behind her, somewhere in the glowing web of the city, Luca Moretti still believed he had arranged the board exactly as he wanted. He had no idea another player had entered the game, or that the most decisive move would belong not to him, not to Ethan, but to the woman whose work they both needed, and whose heart, for the first time, she was beginning to protect as fiercely as her designs. The next morning dawned sharp and cold, the kind of Chicago chill that sliced through even the heaviest coat. Amina walked into Moretti Urban Group's lobby with her chin high, her steps steady, her mind already sorting through the day's to-do list. She had slept little, but clarity had replaced exhaustion, an alertness born from knowing that her world was shifting beneath her feet. The lobby was as polished as always, marble floors gleaming like frozen lakes, walls adorned with hyper-realistic renderings of future projects, and the reception desk manned by a young employee who usually greeted Amina with cheerful familiarity. Today, the smile faltered. "Good morning, Ms. Cole," he said, swallowing. I'm supposed to tell you your clearance isn't working at the moment. IT update, they need you to wait." Her badge flashed red when she held it to the turnstile. A minor glitch, she might have told herself, on any other day, but the receptionist wouldn't meet her eyes. Amina stepped aside, settling into one of the lobby chairs. Colleagues streamed past, offering polite nods, puzzled looks, a few sympathetic winces that confirmed what she already sensed. This wasn't IT. This was orchestrated. She waited. 15 minutes, 30, 45. Then the elevator doors opened, and Victor Sanderson, head of operations and Luca's closest ally, stepped out. His gray suit was immaculate, his expression carved with the professional concern of someone who had practiced empathy so often it no longer resembled the real thing. "Amina," he said warmly, "sorry for the delay. Can you come with me? Luca wants to speak with you." Those words sent a ripple down her spine, not fear, but a hardening, like steel cooling into resolve. "Of course," she replied. Victor led her through the lobby and into the elevator. He pressed the button for the executive floor, and the doors closed with a hush. The ascent felt too quiet. When the doors opened, the hallway outside the large glass conference room was lined with stillness. The blinds were drawn, the lights bright, and two members of building security stood near the door. Not aggressive, but present, like punctuation marks signaling something important was about to be said. Victor gestured. Right inside, Amina stepped in. She expected Luca. She didn't expect the entire executive team. Around the long glass table sat 12 faces: legal counsel, HR, senior partners, operations heads. And at the far end, standing rather than sitting, was Luca himself. His expression was composed, but the slanted set of his jaw revealed something simmering beneath the surface. "Amina," he said smoothly, "please take a seat." She didn't sit. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying. Luca exhaled softly, as if disappointed by her question. "There's been a development," he said. "Something we need to address immediately." He tapped a button on the remote in his hand. The screen behind him lit up with a still frame from the hotel's lobby camera, the image crisp, the timestamp unmistakable. Amina and Ethan standing together, talking, walking out side by side. A rustle of whispers passed around the table like wind skimming the surface of a lake. Luca clasped his hands. "Last night," he said, tone measured, "you were observed meeting privately with the CEO of Northline Collective, our direct competitor, without disclosure, without authorization." Amina's pulse thudded once in her throat, but she kept her face steady. "That's not illegal," she replied. "I'm allowed to have conversations." "Conversations," Luca repeated, with a soft scoff he tried and failed to hide. "Amina, this isn't about coffee. This is about the fact that Northline has been attempting to undermine our strategic foothold in the Lakeshore development for years. And you, our lead designer, were seen meeting with Ethan Ward less than 24 hours before we present final numbers to the city. He stepped closer, voice lowering to a tone of practiced disappointment. Do you understand how this looks? Amina lifted her chin. I met him because he approached me after the presentation. I didn't discuss internal data. I didn't share confidential information. But you met him, Luca said, alone. HR counsel leaned forward. Ms. Cole, we've launched an internal review into potential breaches of your confidentiality agreement. Amina's blood went cold. This is absurd, she said quietly. Victor slid a printed folder toward her, a copy of her contract. Highlights marked clauses about client privacy, competitive conflicts, intellectual property protections. This is the section in question, he said. Luca folded his arms, watching her with an expression she recognized too well. The one he wore when cornering an opponent while pretending to extend a hand. This is a serious matter, he said. We can't ignore it. The project, the company, everything is at stake. Amina breathed slowly, letting the room settle around her. She understood now. This wasn't about her meeting with Ethan. This was the trap, the pretext, the carefully timed maneuver to discredit her before she could challenge him. She glanced around the table. Some faces looked away. Others watched her with a kind of cautious pity. Only one, Maria from legal, looked genuinely uncomfortable, her fingers fidgeting with a pen she didn't dare drop. Amina stepped forward, palms flat on the table. You're accusing me of espionage, she said, her voice low but clear. Do you have any evidence that I shared proprietary information? Silence. Luca's jaw twitched. We have enough to raise suspicion. Suspicion. Weaponized suspicion. A smear dressed as concern. And conveniently, Amina added softly, days before we finalized the Lakeshore proposal. Quite the coincidence. A murmur rippled across the room. Luca's eyes hardened. Are you suggesting this is orchestrated? You tell me, she replied. Then she reached into her bag and placed a small black recording device on the table. Not the explosive evidence, not yet, but enough to send a ripple of unease through Luca's expression. I've documented every aspect of my work, Amina said. Every draft, every timestamp, including the versions where you acknowledge my authorship before removing it. The temperature in the room shifted. Luca took a slow breath. Amina, he said, voice controlled. This is not the way professionals handle internal concerns. No, she answered. Professionals don't weaponize suspicion to silence someone before they can speak. His composure wavered, just for a heartbeat. The room went utterly still. Amina, HR counsel said carefully, for now we ask that you surrender your badge and step away from company systems until we conclude the investigation. She absorbed the blow without flinching. If they expected tears, panic, apologies, they would get none. She reached for her badge, unclipped it, and placed it gently on the table. Luca looked almost triumphant. We'll be in touch, he said, his voice smooth as lacquer. This isn't over. Amina met his gaze, unblinking. No, she replied softly. It isn't. She collected her bag, lifted her chin, and walked past the executives as if walking through smoke that could no longer choke her. And as she stepped into the elevator, the city sprawling below her in its steel and sunrise grace, she understood the truth of the moment. Luca had just played his strongest move, but she had moves he didn't know existed. Moves Naomi had armed her with, moves Ethan had awakened, moves she had earned through brilliance, not deception. As the elevator descended, she closed her eyes and allowed the anger, the hurt, the fear to settle into something steadier. Purpose. Luca wanted to make her the villain of his story, but he had miscalculated one thing. She wasn't in his story anymore. He was in hers, and he had no idea what chapter he just walked into. Snow threatened the edges of the sky as Amina stepped out of the Marquette building, the cold slicing into her like a question she couldn't yet answer. The badge clipped from her blazer had left a faint impression on the fabric, an absence more symbolic than physical. She breathed into her scarf, watching her breath bloom into the cold, then vanish. The city moved around her with indifference. Cars, people, streetlights flicking awake one by one. The world continued, even as hers creaked at the joints. She walked until the building was behind her, until her legs found a rhythm steady enough to drown the tremors, tightening her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She simply kept moving, as if the motion alone could keep her from collapsing under the weight of the morning. Her phone buzzed. Naomi, saw the alert. They pulled your access. Are you safe? Amina typed with fingers that felt strangely distant. Amina, I'm fine. They played the footage, called it reasonable suspicion. The investigation has begun. A pause. Then, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Amina closed her eyes briefly. It wasn't Naomi's fault. It wasn't her burden, but the consequences would touch them both. She didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, she took a train to the Art Institute, paying the entrance fee with hands that still felt out of place in her own skin. She walked through the silent wings until she found the gallery she always returned to when her thoughts threatened to devour her. Stained glass, color held captive by light. Amina stood before a panel depicting a river bending towards sunrise. The blues were deepened too, the streaks of gold warm enough to thaw something inside her chest. She let the quiet hold her. She let herself breathe. But peace was never meant to last long. Her phone vibrated again, this time with a call. Ethan. She hesitated only a moment before answering. Amina? His voice was low, attuned. I heard what happened. Of course he had. News traveled fast in their world. Quicker than truth. Quicker than justice. Let me guess, she murmured. The rumor is that I sold company secrets to my midnight date with the enemy. There was a soft exhale on the other end. Something like frustration. Something like pain. That's not what I heard, Ethan said. But it's what Luca wants everyone to hear. Amina shifted her weight. The gallery lights cast soft reflections on her skin. And what do you believe? I believe, Ethan said simply, that he set a trap and you walked straight into it. Because you were never meant to walk out clean. Silence curled between them, not empty, but dense with everything that hadn't been spoken yet. You're quiet, he noted. Just thinking, she replied. About coming to Northline? She almost smiled. About surviving the next 48 hours. Ethan's voice softened. You don't have to do that alone. Amina stepped back from the stained glass, letting the shifting colors fade from her vision. Acceptance isn't the issue, Ethan. Optics are. If I run to you now, Luca wins the narrative. I become the defector who jumped ship when things got hard. You can counter the narrative, but not without consequences. She heard him inhale. You're right. It won't be clean. It won't be pretty. And some people will believe the worst no matter what evidence you bring forward. That's the part that worries me, she said quietly. No, Ethan countered, his tone steady. What worries you is that you've spent your whole life being exceptional, and now you might have to be human. The words struck her, not as a wound, but as a truth. Being human, he added softly, is allowed. Amina looked out at the soft blur of museum visitors drifting through the gallery. It's not about me, she murmured. It's about the communities the Lake Project touches. If Luca manipulated the numbers, if the city builds on fraudulent forecasts, people will be displaced. Floodplains will fail. And that, Ethan said, is why the truth has to come out, no matter how messy the path. Later that evening, Amina finally returned to her apartment. She set her coat aside, her bag on the table, and stared at her laptop like it was both a lifeline and a landmine. When she opened it, her inbox was already a battlefield. Subject, concerns regarding conduct. Subject, mandatory investigation protocol. Subject, temporary system lockout. Subject, urgent, response required. Among them, a message from an old mentor. Amina, I'm hearing things. Call me before you say anything publicly. And another from an industry contact. If you need a place to land, let's talk, but quietly. She exhaled. No one wins clean. No one emerges untouched. Not in a fight like this. Every message was a reminder that reputations in their field were as fragile as the glass facades they designed. Easy to shatter, slow to rebuild. She clicked on a folder she'd created the night before. Timeline, authorship, and evidence. It contained only a fraction of what she needed. Enough to unsettle, not enough to win. Her phone buzzed again. I talked to Renee Castor. She can meet tonight if you want, but you need to be sure. Once you involve her, there's no stepping back into silence. Amina typed slowly. Amina, I'm sure. Meet me there. She grabbed her coat, hesitated, then reached for the USB drive, the one Naomi had handed her in the car. She slipped it into her pocket and left the apartment. The lawyer's office was in a brick building in River North, its interior lined with dark wood and the scent of freshly brewed tea rather than the sterility of corporate firms. Renee Castor was a tall black woman with silver-streaked locks pulled into a regal twist and a gaze that held no illusions. You've brought heat to your doorstep, Renee said as Amina and Naomi sat down. And fire spreads. If you want to do this, you need to understand the risks. Amina folded her hands. Tell me. Renee leaned forward. If Luca manipulated investor documents, we're dealing with securities violations. If he falsified projections, the SEC may take interest. Whistleblowing can protect you, but only if you follow procedure. And even then, your career may take a beating. May? Naomi echoed. Try will. Renee continued without flinching. Luca will retaliate. The company will distance themselves from you. Some colleagues will turn, some friends. Everyone will want you to speak quietly, politely, discreetly. And no matter how much evidence you bring, some people will call you angry or jealous or difficult, especially because you are a black woman in a white-led firm with a powerful man at its center. Amina absorbed the words like stones placed one by one in her hands, not to crush her, but to measure her strength. And the alternative? She asked. The alternative, Renee said, is letting someone else rewrite your story while they erase everything you built. Amina closed her eyes. When she opened them, clarity replaced fear. Then we fight, she said. And though none of the women smiled, something in the room steadied, like architecture settling into its true structure after a storm. Outside, night had deepened. Snow began to fall, soft and unhurried, spreading quiet across the sidewalks. For the first time in days, Amina felt her breath emerge without trembling. The victory ahead would not be clean, it would not be pretty, and it would not be kind. But it would be hers. The morning Amina signed her name on the first official document, the sky was a low, unbroken gray, Chicago wrapped in a hush that felt almost ceremonial. Renee's office was quiet, the usual hum of phones and printers replaced by the stillness of a space holding its breath. The blinds were half open, letting in a soft, diffused light that made everything, tables, folders, faces, look more bare, more honest. On the polished wood between them lay the forms. Not grand, not dramatic, just paper and ink in small boxes that, once checked, could not be unchecked. Read it slowly, Renee said. Every word. Amina did. Her name at the top. The company's name below it. Sections describing suspected misconduct. Misrepresented projections. Manipulated investor materials. Systemic erasure of authorship. There was a box to indicate whether she feared retaliation. She looked at it for a long moment and checked, yes. This goes to the SEC, Renee explained gently. It starts the formal process. You'll also submit a mirrored complaint to state regulators later, but this is the spine. Once it's in their hands, the clock starts for them. And for you. Naomi sat to Amina's left, hands clasped in her lap, fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. She looked both exhausted and strangely lighter, as if finally stepping toward what she feared had peeled something off her shoulders. Whistleblower status, Renee continued, doesn't make you untouchable, but it gives you legal protections Luca doesn't expect you to know how to use. Amina inhaled. The pen felt heavier than it should. Her entire life she had signed documents that confirmed she belonged. Scholarship forms, work contracts, loan agreements, letters of acceptance. Her signature had always been an entryway, proof that she was welcome at the table. This was different. This was her signature as a boundary. She wrote her name. The letters curved across the page in her careful script, as if they had been waiting for this shape all along. Renee watched, her eyes warm but unsentimental. "You understand," she said quietly, "that once this is filed, you're not just a wronged employee. You are a witness, a primary source, and they will try to break you to protect themselves." Amina met her gaze. "I understand," she replied, "but I've seen what happens when no one speaks. Naomi's files are full of ghosts." Naomi's eyes glistened, but she did not look away. Renee gathered the documents, sliding them into a secure envelope. "Good," she said softly. "Then let's make sure you're not one of them." The days that followed unfolded like a dream she couldn't quite wake from. The official communication from Moretti Urban arrived, sanitized and precise. Pending investigation into potential conflicts of interest, Ms. Cole will remain on leave. The company takes integrity seriously and will fully cooperate with any regulatory inquiries. Internally, the tone was different. She heard about it through colleagues' hesitant texts. "They're saying you were recruited by Northline to sabotage the proposal. HR is framing it as a tragic lapse in judgment. I'm sorry. I don't know what to believe, but I know you." Rumors mutated in the margins where truth had not yet been allowed to enter. Some cast her as a traitor, others as a reckless idealist who had let emotion overrule professionalism. The most vicious ones, woven through the industry grapevine, suggested an affair with Ethan, as if her body had to be involved for her brilliance to matter. Amina read each message with a detached sort of ache. It hurt, yes, but almost in the way healing did, sharp, necessary, revealing what was broken. She forwarded nothing to her parents. When they called, she spoke of company politics and a transition period, her voice steady enough that her mother didn't push further. Yet, that lie sat heavy in her chest, but until she had something solid to offer in its place, she couldn't bear to put fear in their voices too. One evening, as the city sank into a haze of streetlights and early snow, Ethan sent a single text. "Can we talk?" Not as Northline, just as me. She stared at the screen, thumb hovering. A part of her wanted to shut everything out, to keep him at a distance until the dust settled, until she could be sure that trusting him wouldn't simply reroute her into a different kind of dependency. Another part, quieter but sincere, remembered the way he had listened in the cafe, the way he had acknowledged her risks without pretending to share them equally. She typed back, "Amina, I'm at home. Call if you need to." The ring came seconds later. "Hey," Ethan said, voice softer than she'd heard it in those crowded rooms where men threw around millions like spare coins. "How are you holding up?" "Depends which hour you ask," she replied, and surprised herself with the small, wry sound in her own voice. He exhaled a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "That sounds honest." She told him, in broad strokes, about filing the complaint, about Renee's stern kindness, about the way people changed tone mid-sentence when they realized the narrative was shifting and she wouldn't play the role Luca had written for her. He listened, interjected only to clarify, never to interrupt. It was a rare thing, she realized, to be heard without being prematurely rescued. "This is going to get uglier," he said at last. "You know that." "I do." "Northline can help," he added, "not just with contracts or reputation, with data. If regulators need analysts, if the city needs an alternate read on the numbers, we have people who can back you." She leaned her shoulder against the cool glass of her window, watching snow spiral down through the light. "And what do you want in return?" A fair question, one he didn't shy away from. "I want two things," he said steadily. "One, for the Lakeshore project to be built on honest foundations, even if Northline never touches it. 2, for you to have a career that belongs to you, not to Luca's shadow. The simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than any elaborate pitch. You're leaving out something else, she said softly. This hurts your rival. That matters to you. Yes, he admitted, it does. I'm not above wanting that. But if this were just about revenge, I wouldn't have put contracts on the table that give you leverage over me. Snow tapped lightly against the glass like a quiet percussion. You don't owe me trust, he added. But if there's any way I can stand beside you without making this worse, tell me. Or tell me nothing and just let me know if you're drowning. His words threaded through her, warm and disconcerting. She had spent so long being the one others leaned on, for analysis, for clarity, for calm. The idea of someone else offering to be a steady point for her felt dangerously close to comfort. I'm not drowning, she murmured. Not yet. Good, he replied, but if the water rises, call me, even if it's just to say you're treading. She didn't promise she would, but she also didn't hang up. They talked then, not about Luca, not about regulators, but about the city, about the neighborhoods that had shaped them, how each of them carried maps beneath their skin. Ethan spoke of growing up in Portland, of falling in love with Chicago as an adult because it understood grit in a way no place he'd ever lived did. Amina shared small pieces of her childhood, the trains, the laundry lines, the way cracked sidewalks had been her first topography. It was not a declaration, not a surrender, not even an agreement, but it was a beginning. Somewhere between their words, she realized. Law might be the path that formalized her fight, but it wasn't the only structure holding her up. There were people now. Naomi with her files and haunted conscience, Renee with her sharp mind and unflinching clarity, Ethan with his flawed sincerity and steady offer, that formed a kind of scaffolding around her. The blows would still land. The damage would still hurt, but she was no longer standing alone in an empty frame. As the call ended and the night deepened around her, Amina placed her palm flat against the window, watching her reflection blur against the city lights. She had chosen the whistleblower path. The law was now part of her story, a stern, unromantic, necessary character. But beneath it all, beating steadily, was something older and more fragile. Her belief that truth, once spoken, could still change the shape of the world, even if it broke her heart a little on the way there. The city council chamber had never been meant for theater, and yet it had become one. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of bodies and expectation. Cameras perched on tripods like metallic birds, their red lights blinking, hungry for angles. Reporters whispered into microphones, adjusting their expressions to match the gravity of the moment, or the drama they hoped to manufacture from it. At the front, beneath the city seal, the council dais curved in a shallow arc. Nameplates gleamed. Stacks of reports sat open like patient, silent witnesses. On one side of the room, the Moretti urban delegation assembled in tailored precision. Luca in a dark suit, flanked by lawyers and consultants, his profile calm, almost benevolent. On the other side sat representatives from community groups and local business associations, many holding hand-painted signs, "Waterfront for all." No more broken promises. And somewhere between those two worlds, at a modest table facing the council, Amina sat with Renee to her left and Ethan to her right. She could feel the story being written around her before she said a word. A headline from that morning still hovered in the back of her mind. Love, lies, and the lakeshore. Whistleblower caught between rival developers. They had turned her ethics into a subplot, her fear into spectacle, her courage into gossip. She tried not to let it touch her. But she was human, and the words were designed to bruise. Ready? Renee's voice was low, anchoring. The older woman's gaze remained fixed on the council, but the question was meant only for her. As I'll ever be, Amina replied. Ethan said nothing, but she felt the subtle brush of his elbow against hers, the warmth of his presence like a quiet vow. He'd insisted on sitting here, not at Northline's designated table. The optics had worried her. The support had steadied her anyway. A gavel struck wood. The room fell into a hush that vibrated with static an unspoken judgment. Today's agenda, Council Chair Delgado announced, includes review and reconsideration of the Lakeshore Renewal Initiative in light of new information and formal complaints concerning its financial representations and authorship claims. Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Amina, then on Luca. We will hear from the complainant, Ms. Cole, followed by responses from Moretti Urban Group and public commentary. I remind everyone that this is a hearing, not a trial, but the record we create here will matter. To the city, to investors, to the communities affected. She nodded toward Amina's table. Ms. Cole, when you're ready. Every sound in the chamber seemed to vanish. For a moment, all Amina could hear was the soft drum of her own pulse. She stood. Her legs felt both heavy and weightless, like walking into deep water. She moved to the podium, placed her notes there, and then, after a brief pause, set them aside. When she spoke, her voice carried more clearly than she expected. My name is Amina Cole, she began. I am an urban designer, born and raised in this city. For the past several years, I led the conceptual framework for what is now known as the Lakeshore Renewal Initiative. A few murmurs flickered through the room, quickly suppressed. I'm here today, she continued, not because I enjoy conflict or because I'm part of some narrative you've read about, but because the truth of how this project has been presented to investors, to the city, and to the public has diverged from the truth of how it was actually conceived and modeled. She spoke of the process not in jargon, but in human terms. Late nights, community meetings, residents who told her stories about flooding basements, and children who had never seen the lake up close because the path there felt unwelcome, unsafe, or simply blocked. Then she described the numbers, clear, precise, how early-stage projections, clearly labeled as exploratory, had been extracted from her files and polished into certainty in investor decks, how risk buffers had been quietly minimized, how the city-facing materials had leaned heavily on her credibility while erasing her authorship. I am not here to say the project should die, she said softly. I still believe the lakefront can be transformed in a way that honors the people who live around it instead of displacing them. I am here to say that it must be done honestly, or it should not be done at all. She paused, letting that hang in the air, letting the camera lenses drink it in. Behind her, she could feel Luca's gaze like a steady pressure between her shoulder blades. One council member, a man with tired eyes and a careful tie, leaned forward. Ms. Cole, he asked, are you suggesting fraud? Renee's pen moved once on the legal pad, a small signal, a line under a sentence. I am suggesting, Amina replied, that the projections presented to investors and to this body do not accurately reflect the assumptions in my original work, and that this discrepancy is not accidental. The room drew in a breath. She did not say fraud. She did not need to. The word now was between the lines, where it belonged. Another council member, a woman with silver-streaked hair, spoke next. And what about the questions surrounding your relationship with Northline? She asked, her tone neutral but direct. Some have framed your complaint as part of a competitive play. There it was, the spectacle reaching for center stage. Amina lifted her chin. I understand why that question exists, she said, but the timeline is clear. My concerns about authorship and misrepresentation began long before I ever met Mr. Ward. Naomi Briggs, Moretti's own compliance officer, confirmed the pattern. My decision to file was about integrity, not allegiance. She allowed herself then to glance toward Ethan. He sat very still, hands folded, gaze steady on her, not claiming her, not disowning her, simply there. Northline has offered support, Amina continued, facing the council again. But whether or not they benefit from what happens next does not change whether what Luca Moretti did was right or wrong. The simplicity of that landed with more force than any accusation. When she returned to her seat, her legs were buzzing, but her heartbeat had steadied. Renee's hand brushed briefly against her forearm in a quiet acknowledgement. You did well, the lawyer murmured. Ethan said nothing, but there was a softness in his eyes that made Amina look away before it could unravel her composure. Then it was Luca's turn. He walked to the podium like a man approaching a familiar stage. His smile was modest, his posture open, every inch of him broadcasting reasonableness and hurt dignity. "First," he began, "I want to say how deeply I regret that Ms. Cole feels wronged. I have always considered her a valued member of our team." The word team rang hollow in Amina's ears. "What we do," Luca continued, "is inherently collaborative. Ideas come from many places. My role has always been to synthesize, shepherd, and secure support for projects that are ultimately greater than any one individual." He acknowledged miscommunications. He admitted that attribution could have been clearer. He even conceded that some early projections may have been too optimistic, but framed it as passion, not manipulation. "Never," he said, "have I intentionally misled investors or this council. Our goal has always been to uplift this city. If mistakes were made, they were made in pursuit of that goal, not greed." It was a careful speech, polished, meant to leave just enough room for doubt to grip onto. But as he spoke, small fissures appeared. He referred to models he claimed to understand, only to stumble when a council member asked a specific question about baseline flood recurrence intervals. His answer was vague, then redirected toward, "What our team assures me is manageable." He described brainstorming sessions that Amina knew had never occurred. Created memories where none existed. Council Chair Delgado watched him with a composure that gave nothing away. When public comment began, the room shifted again. Residents stepped to the microphone, some in favor of the project as promised, others wary, their voices bearing the weight of past broken deals. One woman from a lakeside neighborhood said quietly, "I don't know who's telling the whole truth here, but I know this. I've seen Ms. Cole at our community meetings. She listened. She came back. She remembered my daughter's name. I never once saw Mr. Moretti until today." The chamber hummed. Ethics, spectacle, numbers, stories. They all collided here, in this drafty room where decisions would be sculpted out of impressions and documentation, emotion and fact. When the hearing finally adjourned, the council announced no verdict. They would review the record, consider next steps, coordinate with regulators. Words that translated to, "This is not over." Outside the chamber, cameras surged. "Ms. Cole, are you and Mr. Ward working together behind the scenes? Is this personal, professional, both? Luca, do you feel betrayed by someone you mentored?" Amina stepped into the storm of questions, shoulders squared. Ethan moved into her periphery, a constant presence. He didn't shield her. He didn't speak for her. He simply remained at her side, close enough that the cameras captured them together, but not so close that he swallowed her shadow. In that chaotic hallway, with flashbulbs flaring and narratives clamoring for dominance, Amina understood. The spectacle would always try to consume the ethics, but the ethics were why she had come. And as long as she kept walking toward that truth, clear, steady, unflinching, no headline could fully rewrite the story she was determined to tell. Winter deepened its grip on Chicago in the days that followed the public hearing. The lake turned the color of pewter, the wind slicing through the gaps between buildings with a precision that felt almost personal, cold with intent, relentless in its purpose. Inside that brittle season, the city hummed with rumor. The hearing had cracked something open, not enough to bring resolution, but enough to unsettle the ground Luca Moretti stood on. Enough to tilt the spotlight, however slightly, toward questions he wasn't accustomed to answering. And Luca, as always, responded to discomfort with strategy. His last big move began quietly, too quietly for Amina to notice at first. But then the signs surfaced like cracks spiderwebbing across glass. A whisper here, a leak there, a message from an anonymous source to a business columnist. A rumor seated at a private luncheon. Watch how she left. Watch who she met. Watch who benefits if Moretti fails. The smear campaign didn't shout. it insinuated. One morning, Amina woke to her phone vibrating relentlessly. Naomi had sent a link. Chicago Chronicle. Whistleblower or opportunist? Questions rise over designers' motives in Lakeshore controversy. Amina sat at her kitchen counter, the article's words blurring briefly before they sharpened into painful clarity. The writer quoted unnamed sources claiming she had been in secret communication with Northline for months, that she had been strategically positioned to weaken Moretti Urban from within. They referenced the timing of her complaint, the curious alignment between the public hearing and rising support for Northline's alternative proposals. And worst of all, they reduced her authorship claim to a matter of bruised ego. Talented but overly emotional, one anonymous associate said. Amina struggled with leadership structures and may have acted impulsively. She closed the article, jaw tightening. They were painting her not just as disloyal, but unstable, a classic play, painfully familiar. Moments later, her phone buzzed again. A message from Ethan. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you Luca might escalate like this." Amina replied with steady fingers. Warning wouldn't have softened it. No, but you shouldn't have to face it alone either. She didn't answer immediately. She couldn't, not yet. But Luca was not done. While Amina fought to steady her reputation, he was sinking stakes deep into the physical landscape of the Lakeshore District. Through a web of shell companies, most registered to obscure addresses, some under the names of distant relatives, Moretti Urban began acquiring key parcels of land. A vacant lot here, a defunct warehouse there, an old parking structure whose owner suddenly found himself with an irresistible offer. At first, the moves appeared unconnected. Then Naomi called her in a panic. "He's cornering the district," Naomi said, breath tight. "The parcels he's buying? They're keystones, Amina. If he controls them, your design becomes impossible without his permission." Fear flickered through Amina's chest, swift and sharp. "Is it legal?" she whispered. "Barely," Naomi hesitated, "but legal isn't the same as ethical. And he knows that in development, control of land is control of the narrative." Amina gripped the edge of her desk. Her models depended on certain access points, pathways where pedestrian corridors must open, transit nodes that required uninterrupted flow. Luca was choking them one by one. He wants to force a redesign, Amina realized. A compromise. "No," Naomi said, voice low. "He wants to force you to come crawling back, claiming the original design was flawed. If you say it, the regulators won't hear anything else." Amina closed her eyes, pulse throbbing at her temples. It was diabolical in its simplicity. He couldn't discredit her evidence, but he could sabotage her work, the things she loved, the things she lived for, and make her choose between her truth and the integrity of the city she fought to protect. If she held firm, her project collapsed. If she bent, her credibility fractured. Luca wasn't aiming to ruin her career. He was aiming to break her heart. That evening, Amina met Ethan and Renee in Northline's conference room. Its warm amber lights a jarring contrast to the Cold War being waged outside. "He's cornered the pier approach," Ethan said, pointing to a map. "And these two inland parcels here, one purchased through a shell in Delaware registered 3 weeks ago, the other through a blind trust. Doesn't take a genius to trace the pattern." Renee added, "A classic diversion tactic. Distract regulators with rumors and character attacks while you quietly shift the structural landscape. He wants to create facts on the ground before the SEC can fully look at the numbers." Amina stared at the map. It ached to look at. Her design, its balance, its logic, its grace, dented by acquisition pins. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned forward, his expression unreadably steady. "We fight the land grab," he said. "We challenge the purchases in public hearings. We appeal to the zoning board. We mobilize the community groups who stand to lose the most." Amina swallowed. "That's not enough." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "You have an idea," she nodded slowly. "If he wants to control the land," she whispered, "then we make the land speak for itself." Both of them waited. Amina exhaled, gathering her courage like thread between trembling fingers. Several of those parcels sit on unstable soil, she said. Legacy fill. If Luca intends to build vertically or convert them without proper remediation, he's risking structural failure. And I can prove it. Renee's eyes lit with realization. You have geotechnical data. Yes, Amina whispered. Years of it. The room filled with a different kind of tension. Less fear, more purpose. A shift. A spark. For the first time in days, Amina felt the ground tilt beneath her in a direction she could use. But Luca, too, was shifting. The next morning, across the city, community leaders received glossy brochures from Moretti Urban proclaiming a new, improved lakeshore vision, built on experience, not experiments. The document included subtle digs at untested designers and outsider influence, and screenshots of Amina and Ethan walking into the public hearing together, angled to suggest impropriety. The caption read, "Ask yourself, whose interests are really being served?" Amina stood in her apartment, brochure in hand, fury pulsing hot beneath her ribs. Naomi called again, voice frantic. "Amina, have you seen the latest? He's implying you intentionally sabotaged the project for Northline." And then, more quietly, "I think he's losing control." Amina set the brochure down, her fingers steady despite the storm inside her. "No," she said softly. "This is what Luca does when he thinks control is slipping." Her voice did not tremble. She was angry, yes, hurt deeply. But she was also something new, something forged in pressure. Luca's last big move was powerful, but not perfect. And Amina had spent her entire life studying structures, especially the kind that looked unbreakable until the moment they cracked. The night it all finally shifted did not announce itself with thunder or spectacle. It arrived instead as a quiet Thursday, gray and unremarkable, the kind of day that vanished between emails and errands. Snowmelt slicked the sidewalks. The lake was a flat sheet of dull silver, and Chicago moved as it always did, fast, preoccupied, unaware that somewhere in its circuitry, a fault line was about to give. Amina was at her dining table, surrounded by maps and legal pads, when Naomi called. There was something in Naomi's voice Amina had never heard before. Not fear, not guilt, electricity. "Amina," she said, breathless, "you need to come. Now, I think we have it." "Have what?" Amina asked, already standing. "The ledger," Naomi whispered. "The real one." Naomi's apartment was modest and meticulously ordered, the kind of place where every object had earned its right to exist. Tonight it was transformed into an impromptu command center. Laptop open, paper spread, a pot of coffee half drunk on the counter. Renee sat at the small kitchen table, reading glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through printouts with a focus that made the air itself feel sharper. Ethan stood near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled, his posture tense, as if bracing for something that mattered more than any bid he'd ever made. Naomi met Amina at the door, hands trembling slightly. "I wasn't looking for it," she said, her voice low. "I swear I wasn't. It was buried in a backup folder on the internal server, tagged as historic modeling references. I almost missed it." She led Amina to the table and placed a thick stack of pages in front of her. "This," Naomi whispered, "is the ledger Moretti never thought anyone would see." Amina's gaze moved over the columns. Project names, parcel codes, investor IDs. At first glance, it looked like any other internal record, numbers and notations in a world built on decimals and dates. But then, the pattern emerged. There were dual entries for key projects, one labeled external with inflated projections, another labeled internal with far more conservative figures. Notes in the margins connected them with a cold, efficient shorthand. Adjust for optimism, delta, investor-facing only. Utilize Cole's model for narrative, not baseline. Reframe risk as innovation variance. Her own name appeared in several lines, not as author, not as partner, but as justification. Cole's reputation offsets perception risk. Her stomach tightened. These annotations, Renee said quietly, tapping a page, are damning. They show intent. This isn't sloppy math. This is design. And look here, Naomi added, flipping to the back. Luca's personal notes, references to the shell companies he's using to buy the lakeshore parcels, cross-referenced with projected appreciation once zoning changes go through. Amina's eyes traced the carefully linked codes, the neat script that turned land into leverage. What this proves, Renee went on, is that Luca isn't just cutting ethical corners. He's using privileged information about public decisions to position his own entities, at the expense of investors, the city, and the communities on that shoreline. Ethan stepped closer, his expression taut. This is more than regulatory, he said. This is boardroom-grade dynamite. Naomi nodded. That's why I didn't send it electronically. I printed it, scrubbed the logs as best I could, and walked out the door. Amina looked up at her friend, her chest warm and aching at once. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, Naomi replied softly. I did. There was no drama in her voice, just the steady certainty of someone who had finally chosen the side of herself she wanted to live with. A quiet settled over the table. A moment of recognition that the balance had changed, not overturned yet, but shifted. What now? Amina asked. Renee folded the top page with care. Now, she said, we let someone inside his own house see the fire in the walls. They met Harold Lynn 2 nights later in a private lounge above an old hotel near the river. Its wood-paneled walls and low lighting giving everything the feeling of a conversation that did not want to be seen. Harold had been on Moretti Urban's board longer than Luca had been CEO. A precise man in his late 60s, he wore his age like a well-tended suit. Nothing flashy, but impossible to ignore. His eyes were dark, thoughtful, with a weariness that suggested he'd watched more storms than he cared to count. I don't have much time, he said simply, easing into the leather chair opposite them. If Luca's people see us together, they'll invent explanations I'd rather not give. He nodded toward the folder on the table. Naomi says you have something I can't afford not to see. Renee slid the ledger forward. No preamble, no flourish, just paper. Harold opened it. As he read, the room seemed to constrict around his focus. His finger followed the rows. His brows drew together, then rose, then settled into a line of deep disappointment. This handwriting, he murmured. I'd know it anywhere. He closed the folder, exhaling through his nose. Tell me, he said, looking at Amina, not at Ethan, not at Renee. In your own words, what do you believe this proves? Amina met his gaze. It proves, she said carefully, that Luca knowingly presented inflated projections to investors while maintaining a separate internal record that told a very different story. That he used my models as a narrative tool, not a basis for responsible planning, and that he has positioned shell companies to profit from land whose value is being manipulated by these same misrepresentations. Harold watched her for a long moment, as if measuring not just her words, but the frame that held them. And what do you want? He asked quietly. The question surprised her, not because she hadn't thought about it, but because few had bothered to ask it without presuming the answer. I want the Lakeshore project built honestly, she said, without fraud, without displacement disguised as progress. I want my authorship acknowledged, not because of ego, but because the record should reflect the truth. And I want Luca to stop using other people's work as a shield for his ambition. Silence followed, but it felt alive. Harold leaned back, the leather chair creaking softly beneath his weight. You've just described, he said, a course of action that will cost this company millions, cost Luca his crown, and cost the board months, if not years, of repair. He did not say it as a threat. He said it as fact. Can Moretti survive this? Ethan asked quietly. Harold's gaze flicked to him, then back to Amina. The company can, he said. The question is whether we deserve to, and whether we can afford the alternative, public implosion, criminal probes, investor exodus. He placed the ledger on the table and tapped it once with a measured fingertip. If this reaches the press before we act, he added, We lose control of the narrative entirely. Renee's tone was cool. You already don't control it, she said. You just don't know that yet. Harold's lips thinned. Then slowly he nodded. What I propose, he said, is a compromise. Not perfect justice, perhaps, but a path that keeps the city, your work, and the livelihoods of thousands of employees from burning down with Luca's ego. He turned fully toward Amina. The board will move to unwind Luca's shell acquisitions, he said. We will restructure the Lakeshore holdings, relinquishing parcels where conflict of interest is clearest. We will also compel Moretti Urban to formally acknowledge your authorship in all internal and public records connected to the conceptual framework. Amina felt a strange lightness in her chest, hope edged with caution. And Luca, she asked, will be asked to step down as CEO pending internal and regulatory review, Harold replied. Not as a scapegoat, but as someone whose judgment can no longer anchor this company. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Naomi's shoulders sagged in something like relief. Renee, ever the lawyer, remained composed. And in return, she asked. In return, Harold said, we request that Ms. Cole and Ms. Briggs coordinate with regulators in a way that allows the company to remediate rather than collapse. We will not ask you to lie. We will ask you to distinguish between systemic rot and salvageable structure. His gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. You burned the house down in the ledger, he said. I'm asking you to let us evacuate the tenants before you light the rest. Amina's eyes stung unexpectedly. She had wanted retribution, yes, but she had never wanted ruin for its own sake. There were junior designers at Moretti, assistants, engineers, people whose rent and children's lunches depended on paychecks that had nothing to do with Luca's decisions. What about me? Naomi asked quietly, and others who signed things we shouldn't have. Those who come forward now, Harold said, will be protected as cooperating witnesses. I'll make that my condition to the board. The room was silent, every breath measured. Amina looked at the ledger, then at the man who represented the best and worst of the institution that had benefited from her brilliance and tried to erase it. This wasn't the clean justice of stories. It was the complicated justice of real life. Leverage, she realized, was not just power over someone. It was the ability to shape what happened next. She nodded, slowly. I'll accept that, she said, on one premise. Harold inclined his head. Name it. That any future mention of the Lakeshore project, she said, voice steady, names me as its original architect. Not as an assistant, not as a collaborator, as the woman who designed its bones. Harold's eyes met hers, and, for the first time in all of this, she saw not calculation, but respect. Done, he said. Later, when they stepped out into the crisp night, Ethan fell into step beside her. The city lights traced a soft halo along the line of his jaw. That was, he began, searching for the right word. A lot. She gave a small, tired laugh. That's one way to describe the moment you realize you might actually win. Not win, he corrected gently. Rewrite. He stopped then, his hand brushing lightly against her sleeve. A question rather than a claim. You okay? He asked. Amina looked up at the city she loved. Flawed, stubborn, relentless. The wind curled around them, cold, embracing, and alive. I think, she said slowly, I'm finally starting to be. His smile in that moment was quiet and bright, like a light left on in a window for someone finding their way home. They walked on, side by side, not triumphant, not unscarred, but holding at last the leverage to build something honest from all that had been broken. The morning after Harold Lynn delivered the board's decision, Chicago felt different to Amina. The winter light seemed clearer, the air sharper, as though the city itself had adjusted its posture. The storm wasn't over, not by any measure, but the winds had shifted. For the first time in weeks, she opened her eyes and felt something close to possibility. She stood at her window with a mug of tea warming her palms, watching the lake roll in muted silver beneath the pale sky. This was the shoreline she had been fighting for, Not the developers, not the investors, not the architects with immaculate portfolios, but the shoreline itself and the people living beside it. Her mind shaped the pathways again, the green spaces, the transit lines flowing in soft, human-centered arcs. She could see it clearly, her vision untouched and whole. As the tea cooled, her phone buzzed. Board making the announcement in an hour. Want company? She smiled, small and involuntary. Amina, only if you bring coffee. Done. And something sweet. Today feels like it deserves sweetness. 15 minutes later, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, Ethan stood there in the hallway, cheeks flushed from the cold, 2 coffees in his hands, and a bakery box balanced precariously against his hip. He looked painfully earnest in the way only a man who cared without knowing exactly how to show it could look. Peace offering, he said, lifting the box, and possibly a bribe for your continued tolerance. Amina stepped aside to let him in. Depends what's inside. Cinnamon buns, he said, made by someone who probably believes butter and sugar are the answers to all mortal problems. Then it's not a bribe, she murmured. It's medicine. They moved to the kitchen table, where maps and notes still lay scattered, a battlefield turned workspace. Ethan set the coffees down, then opened the box, releasing a warm, fragrant sweetness that melted the last thin layer of cold between them. He studied her quietly as she reached for a bun, his gaze soft, almost careful. You look lighter today, he said. She shrugged gently. A different kind of weight, maybe. One I chose. He nodded, understanding without asking for more. The company's press conference began on the small screen she kept on her counter. The Moretti urban emblem appeared, followed by the board's spokesperson, composed, grave, choosing words with the precision of someone diffusing a very public bomb. Effective immediately, Luca Moretti will step down as CEO while an internal and regulatory review proceeds. The board will reevaluate recent land acquisitions and reverse those that violate conflict of interest protocols. The conceptual framework for the Lakeshore Renewal Initiative will be updated to reflect the appropriate authorship. We extend our gratitude to Ms. Amina Cole for her contributions. The words landed like soft impacts, each one confirming a piece of a reality Amina had once feared she might never see acknowledged. She didn't cry, but her breath hitched, the faintest tremor of emotion tightening her chest. Ethan noticed. He didn't say anything. He simply reached across the table, palm up, offering without assuming. She placed her hand in his. Warmth flowed through her, threading gently through the fractures of everything she'd endured. It's not justice, she said softly, watching the screen. Not fully. No, Ethan agreed, but it's a foundation. A foundation. Amina closed her eyes briefly at the tenderness of that word. She had built foundations all her life, for communities, for cities, for futures leading away from the neighborhoods where she'd learned to dream with careful pragmatism. But she had rarely allowed herself to imagine a foundation for her own life beyond work. When the press conference ended, she turned toward him. You stood beside me, she said. Not in front, not above, beside. Ethan's expression gentled. That's where I want to be, if you'll let me. Her pulse quickened, not out of fear this time, but something softer, something that fluttered inside the ribcage like an awakening. I'm not used to being chosen like that, she admitted, without strings. You weren't chosen, he said. You were seen. The words were simple. They landed with weight. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and suddenly needed space. Not distance, just movement. She stood, walking toward the window, watching the light shift across the lake. When I first met you, she said, I thought you were just another man with charm and a cause. And now, Ethan asked, staying seated, voice steady. Now I think you might be someone I could trust, she replied, turning back to him. And that scares me more than any of this. His smile was small, almost shy. Then we'll take it slowly. I'm patient. Amina laughed under her breath. I've noticed that. He rose then, walking toward her with steps that were measured, respectful. When he stopped in front of her, there was no expectation in his posture, just presence. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "But if you ever want something, support, partnership, or even just someone to take the weight off your shoulders for an hour, you can ask." Amina studied the man standing before her, the one who had seen her brilliance before he saw her utility, who had respected her boundaries even when his eyes softened in ways he didn't realize she noticed. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not built on compromise or caution. A future where a man like Ethan didn't eclipse her, he illuminated her. Not as a spotlight, but as a steady, unwavering glow. A soft light in an architectural rendering, subtle but essential. She stepped closer, closing the last inches between them. "Maybe I want something now," she murmured. His breath caught. "Tell me." She reached up, brushing her fingers lightly against his jawline, feeling the warmth beneath his skin. "A moment," she said, "just a real moment, with no hearings, no spreadsheets, no agendas." Ethan's hand lifted slowly, resting against her waist. Careful, deliberate. "A moment," he echoed, voice low. "I can give you that." Their foreheads touched first, a soft, tentative brush of connection that sent a quiet thrill through her. Then his lips met hers, gentle at first, then deepening in a slow, unfolding warmth that felt like the breaking of winter. Not a rescue, not a reward, not a promise of perfection. Just two people finding each other in the ashes of their separate battles, daring to imagine something tender rising between them. In the days that followed, the Lakeshore proposal was formally transferred to Northline stewardship, with Amina named chief designer and principal architect. She walked into their sunlit office not as someone escaping destruction, but as someone stepping into a space built to honor her vision. Her new team greeted her with genuine enthusiasm, and for the first time since the rooftop gala months ago, she felt the ground beneath her steady, not because it was flawless, but because it was finally hers. She still carried the scars of what happened. She always would. But scars are not just reminders of pain, they are proof of healing. And now, standing at the threshold of this new chapter, with a project reclaimed and a heart tentatively opening, Amina understood a quiet truth. Some victories are not loud. Some are not public. Some do not announce themselves in headlines. Some victories begin simply, with breath, with light, with the feeling of new ground rising to meet your step. 6 months later, spring unfurled over Chicago like a slow, breathing promise. The lake shimmered in soft turquoise, the skies stretched open and forgiving, and the city's edge, her city's edge, began to shift in ways only the closest observers would recognize. Cranes rose like slender silhouettes along the waterfront, quiet and patient, their movements guided not by spectacle, but by intention. Underneath them, foundations were being poured according to her designs. Not Luca's revisions, not an inflated investor fantasy, but hers, the original, uncompromised blueprint she had carried in her mind long before anyone else believed in it. Amina stood on the newly restored promenade, a light breeze brushing against her curls, the scent of lake water clean and somehow hopeful. Workers moved in the distance, shadows against the sunlit scaffolding. For a moment, she simply breathed, letting the truth settle. She had not just survived what happened. She had redrawn the landscape it sprang from. Behind her, footsteps approached with a familiarity she had come to cherish. Ethan slid an arm around her waist, not claiming, just sharing the view. "Still surreal?" he asked. "Every day," she murmured. He smiled, brushing a kiss against her temple. "You built something they can't steal. Not now. Not ever." She looked out across the budding shoreline, the bike paths arching like graceful lines of song, the communal green spaces unfurling in small, deliberate patches, the first community center rising with the sunrise behind its beams. "This is the revenge," she whispered. "Not the hearing, not the ledger. This." Ethan followed her gaze. "The real revenge," he echoed, "is beauty, integrity, And the fact that your name is etched into every part of this place. In the distance, a gull dipped low over the waves. Amina closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment, just one, to feel the depth of it all. Not triumph, not gloating, something softer, something earned. Because Luca's downfall, in the end, wasn't the board's suspension or the quiet distancing by investors. It wasn't even the investigations that slowly gathered behind him. His real downfall was this moment he would never touch. Amina standing here, whole and unbroken, her future opening like a horizon he could no longer reach. She turned to Ethan, the man who had offered her not rescue, but respect. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For walking beside me." He touched her cheek gently. "Beside you is the only place I want to be." They stood there until the sun dipped lower, gilding the construction site in warm amber. It looked less like a battlefield now and more like a beginning. Amina had once believed revenge meant exposing the person who wronged her. Now she understood. Revenge was rising. Revenge was reclaiming. Revenge was building a life too luminous for the shadows of her past to dim. And she had done exactly that. If Amina's journey moved you, inspired you, or kept you turning the page, I'd love to share more stories with you. Like, comment, and follow to stay close. More worlds, more romances, and more beautifully fierce heroines await.